What was, I think, a Summerfields until a year or two ago on the Earl Square Road has become a co-op. And I try and go in there rather than say Tesco's, but is it actually any better, really, to do that?
It is, because it doesn't distribute profits to shareholders, and to that extent it's better. I mean, I think it's probably better in terms of labour relations and employer relations. It may be better in terms of its relations with the suppliers. But it's certainly better in the fact that the profits are kept within. I mean, one of the things about the big supermarkets is not only, I want to say something in a minute about why they're cheaper, but the fact is that they suck money out of the local economy. So when a Tesco is there, it's not only got people that it drives out but all the local shops, but if you go and buy in the local greengrocer and baker, they're likely to live locally and then go and spend their money locally. If they need repairs done, if they need work done, they're likely to get local workers to do it. Whereas the supermarkets will have their suppliers, their workers and whatever. So it completely sucks out the local economy, not only from the people it directly puts out of business by taking their business, but because then the profits that are made entirely out of the community altogether. Whereas I mean, even if it's a local profiteering butcher or whatever, some of that money is likely to remain in local circulation and supporting local people. But this question of whether supermarkets are cheaper, I mean, there's been all sorts of research, some which shows that sometimes they're cheaper when they've got special offers and they're cheaper on some things and not on others. But we've got to ask why. Because, and that's partly what George was saying and Derek was saying before, they are because they determine the price. And in many cases, they're forcing farmers to sell things for less than it costs them to produce them. I mean, it's one reason for farming suicides and people going out of farming, is that they can't actually supply the goods at the price that the supermarkets want. And it's another way of capital control. It helps to keep wages down because there's low-cost food available by super exploiting the farmers. And the other thing is, also, you know even less what's in it. I mean, if you go to your local greengrocer, certainly if you go to your local farmer's market, I mean, that obviously can't completely replace the supermarkets of a proper socialised distribution system. But at least you can say, well, what's in this food? What's it being treated with? What's it being made with? I mean, if you go into Tesco and ask what's this apple being sprayed with? You'd be lucky if they even know what an apple is. I mean, it's all sorts of ways. And I mean, I buy in supermarkets as well because it's more convenient. I mean, our local store, 2 minutes away, is a Tesco convenience store. We buy things there nearly every day because it's convenient. And I have to admit, it's better than what was there before, because what we had before was a little corner shop that sold, as far as I can remember, sliced bread, tinned food, and Mars bars. And that was it. And I never saw anybody buying there. I was always convinced it was a front for something else shady. I'm serious. I mean,
a similar corner shop to where I lived as a student was the best place to get drugs in.
Yeah. So I mean, there's no question that the Tesco convenience store that replaced it is better than what was there before. We're in a cleft stick. I wish I didn't have to buy there. But.
Do you think we should think about working class stuff and workers in supermarkets and links that we make with trade unions?
Well, I was going to say that in my neighbourhood, it's very sharply divided as far as shops. If you walk in one direction, there's an extremely nice and very expensive parade of shops with very nice restaurants and actually Tesco's in Dartford Park. And if you walk in the other direction into the council estate, there's what was a small parade of shops that served a working class community, which has been knocked down because they're redeveloping. But it was a crappy shop. I mean, it really was a convenience store. But there was a convenience store and, incidentally, a laundrette because a lot of people didn't have actually, the what it stopped was what people actually, the absolute basics that people could afford and so forth. And because there was no, it was quite an isolated area. And the interesting thing is when the council we were sort of fighting the development, and the council was saying that originally saying they weren't going to put any shops back, and they said that it's right in the middle of the community, that you just knocked its shops down. They agreed to put in shops, and actually wanted to put in 6,000 square feet for basically it would have been, whether it would have been Sainsbury's, it probably wouldn't be Tesco's because they're down the road, but it would have been one of the big chain shops. And actually there was huge opposition from that local community. So I said, no, we don't want that stuff because we get ripped off with that enough. And they knew well enough what was this. If there's something up here where the big supermarkets, if you go down to Camden Town where you've got 2 or 3 big supermarkets, they watch out for the prices. But up here they'll rip us off because they're quite right. So I think the thing is that people, despite all the false consciousness, despite all the lies that people get, that fed, there is sort of people's actual experience of life does lead them, and things like people do like to eat decent food rather than crap, and there comes a point where if there is an alternative, people will tend to look for alternatives if they're at all possible.
So I was just going to say, I'm going back to the point Roland made about de-skilling in a way, if that's the right way to put it. I just think of it in a rhetorical question really, how much of the way things are is to do with people maybe idealise this idea of good food or whatever. Maybe they watch the programmes on television, even if they're not middle class, perhaps because it's wall-to-wall cookery programmes at times. But maybe I'm just wondering if there's some level of idealisation of good food and good eating and healthy living and all the rest of it, which people don't actually do in practice because they perhaps are disconnected from how to do that. One of the experiences I have every year, we have just round our way, because we're in this really weird area, it's quite multi-ethnic, but it's an area that's grown out of the countryside around the town, really. So it kind of, you can walk for 20 minutes and you're in the country park, basically. So we've got a whole load of allotments just around the corner from us, which have been just allowed to run wild. They've gone. So every year, inevitably, we're around there gathering this sort of fruit and whatever. And on a regular basis, there are not just kids, but adults coming up saying, "What are you doing? Those things are poisonous. You'll die. They're big blackberries." And I think well, because they don't know what a blackberry is. And I think there is that element of disconnect from what we eat and what we consume. For a lot of people, it maybe is part of the issue as well.
Yeah, we had the local school had a sort of parents' afternoon, and we were in there we've been collecting apples in the local, and we were pressing apples. It's astonishing the number of the big breakthrough came when I actually crushed my finger in the apple. So all the kids were really good, and then sort of fascinated with the whole thing. But the number of people who looked really suspiciously at this, because of course it was unfiltered and it's sort of brown, muddy looking stuff, and unfiltered and unpasteurised, and we had to work hard with some people who persuade them how to sit, and it's absolutely fantastic. And the enthusiasm that a lot of people were responding to, this is good, do you mean like you can just get apples and sort of crush them? You get sort of, you could see light going on in people's heads, and I think that there is, I know that thing about thinking, oh God, supposing all the lead from the road has got onto these or something, but I do think that there is a sort of an underlying desire that can be tapped somehow.
Yeah, I mean certainly I'm in many ways quite hostile to the idea of lifestyle, because I think there's always a kind of danger that you have the lifestyle, and what we need is big political structural change. And I've been suggesting to people, even though I'm a vegetarian, maybe it's unethical to be a vegetarian, because you're thinking more about the ethics of this than changing things. I think we need to kind of get into the kind of politics of structures, because if you look, say, at Cuba, and you can debate Cuba, but they have this big push to kind of food sovereignty and growing things, and that's because you haven't got privatised land. So I think there's quite a complex thing that we have to do, that we have to have the kind of socialist project, which to me is about means of production, property rights, and class struggle over that, so that you actually have democratic ownership of society. And it's the how do we have this kind of gigantic project to do that. But also we've got to be aware that things are socially constructed, and there is a kind of common sense in society, and we have to kind of think our way out of that. But probably what I do like about the kind of lifestyle stuff is it actually can be really nice. That I don't like the kind of green lifestyle framed as thou shalt not do things, but I just find I've got loads of stuff growing in my garden, fairly wild. I've got my own approach to this, which is very low maintenance, informal permaculture. So I've just got I've just got loads of nice stuff. So I've got spinach, and you cut it and it grows back all the time. So I just come in from work, cut the spinach, and that's part of my meal. And I've got potatoes, I've got parsnips, and I've just got a tiny bit of land. And at least my neighbours, that's the main interaction I have with them in terms of anything political or social, and some of them will grow stuff as well. So I think that pleasurable lifestyle stuff is good, but it's from planning decisions right the way up, it's like the sort of power structures that we have to think about, as we always have to think about.
But we've been talking about food sovereignty here. Effectively, what we've taken is the discussion we've had in the main room and thought of how it's applicable to Britain. But the whole problem in Britain is really what you've just said. How do you actually change things? How do you change these local campaign will stop one supermarket, but it ain't going to stop a lot of them. And that's the only thing you can do is having some kind of socialist project where at some point you hope will work.
Just to come back, there's some really nice stuff from Marx, because Marx and Engels were very keen on the notion of garden cities. I don't know if they used the phrase, but they'd say you have to merge cities and countryside, and that really fits in with the Cuban stuff. And also, this whole history of Britain, that we're in this amazingly conservative, colonial, we're really in the belly of the beast. One of the kind of greatest documents that eco-socialists or Greens can read is to look at chapter 27, first volume of Das Kapital, where he talks about all the struggles against enclosure, and that basically you've got this feudal society, and what's interesting with commons is the bits which they think are shitty and crappy, they let you have, because the serfs have to reproduce themselves. And it's analogous with indigenous people in a place like Canada. They've given all the land that they thought was crap, and now having discovered oil and things underneath it, they then want to get hold of it. And what you have is like people fought back, didn't they? And Marx was saying you had a point where you had people who were free labourers and had access to the commons. I'm a commons obsessive, but there's a whole history of the commons in Britain where people have reclaimed it. And then the feudal system, capital system, whatever system it has, then has to reclaim it to get people being subservient. Because Marx wouldn't say, just stay as a sort of medieval society or romanticise it, but he was certainly aware that sort of late medieval, to some extent, people had rebelled enough to get some land and were independent. And just being, this struggle for land in Britain and food sovereignty in Britain is something that people are not conscious of. It's just seen as, there's all this stuff about Prince Charles where he'll go, you've got to cut the population. And, he's got like 130 servants. And it's sort of taken for granted that nobody in Britain owns land. You know, I digress.
Can we start to build that back in, though, on the back of take the roaming laws in Scotland? Isn't that a good first step to try and get that put forward in England?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I was talking to Adam Ramsey, and he was saying he got involved with green and stuff. So actually he got taken piss up by the Daily Mail because his family have got a castle and he got arrested on Occupy. Although just to digress on this, it's interesting that if people are unemployed, they'll be attacked as being poor, and if they're rich and they become castrated, they'll be attacked and so on. But he was telling me he'd been to an island which is community owned, and they're producing community energy. And one of the things that's happened from the very modest progress in Scotland is that there's been laws where people can take lands, and so maybe even looking to very modern things in Scotland is progress towards going on.
I think Sweden's a good model as well because they have free roaming, but you can also as long as it doesn't affect anyone else, you can probably start growing something in the wild, as long as it's not going to affect the ecology. They've got that much protection, so it's still very much a part of life. Berry picking, mushroom picking, even having boat businesses and rivers and things. They still use the land as a collective resource. So I think Scandinavia is always a good model to look at.
I wanted to come back on Mark's point about taking over Tesco. The thing is, do we think it's enough just to take something like Tesco into social control, or does it need to be broken up? I don't think that is a socially acceptable model of this huge chain that dominates supply and retail and whatever. I mean, I think it isn't just enough to take it over. Obviously, we want to take it out and sort of show each whatever her multi-million lifestyle. But is that enough? I don't think that model can be socialised.
No, well, Pierre was making the point. You either have the current system of industrialised agriculture, you have, if you like, the Leninist model of taking that over as a socialised project and removing the profit motive, or you go to the idea that was made much of in the meeting of, if you like, food sovereignty, which to me is where you can produce locally, you produce locally. For me, that would also, because I'm middle class these days, I like seasonal food. I support the idea of seasonal food. So the idea of eating seasonally, making the most of your local ingredients. All that.
That's what peasants used to do.
Well, indeed, and that's why I think he said the new peasantry, which quite a remarkable phrase, really. But there's something to be said for it if you combine, if you like, traditional peasant practices, which maybe have some ecological sense, with modern science that can back up those practices as being sound, because I think you need a marriage of ecology and science, as it were, with these sort of things.
I think, I was it you that raised the idea of the co-op? And the thing is that actually the co-op as we know it now has changed quite a lot. I mean, its origins were in local institutions, and it was under the pressure, same pressure that produced the big five supermarkets, that forced forced all the independent local co-ops to amalgamate. So it's that like the co-op is the largest farmer in the country today. But it seems to me that there's no, that if that, without that pressure, what co-ops were a response to people reacting and organising, in completely rational ways. So we organise together, we'll actually buy stuff in together cooperatively, and it makes an awful lot. And the thing is that when I was a kid, the co-op milkman would come around, and we knew which farm the co-op bought its milk from, which was about 3 miles away. You know, and I'm sure that was true of co-ops all up and down the country. Because this is a funny situation, you know, that the co-op, the reason why the co-op was in the situation with co-op dairy was because during the war the restriction of competition was imposed for milk deliveries, and there were only 2 allowed in each area, and almost everywhere it was the co-op and one other. Yeah. But it does seem to me that you know that the I mean I sort of shrink a bit this idea of this, you know, I have sort of images of, you know, sort of that we'll all be sitting around, you know, our campfires outside our clay houses, you know, knitting and stuff, and just popping out to sort of pick a few blackberries for supper. And I think, I think that something that, you know, we can see in our own history how alternative models have been developed, right? And so there's no reason why alternative models couldn't be developed again.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of.
So I was just going to make, I think food uniquely can be kept local. And it has
Absolutely,
the benefits
absolutely.
of reducing energy, transport and all
Yeah.
of that. Whereas I'm all in favour of maybe global approaches to maybe energy or something, but food in particular can be kept local, so it's a rather unique thing in that regard.
I was just going to say, I think what seems to come down to is about who controls the production, who controls the distribution. And I think one of the things that it's very easy to forget when we say, oh, can we be supermarkets, can we not be supermarkets, is actually the incredible imagination of ordinary people once they have that release of you know, that kind of that explosion of imagination and genius really that comes with any real change in society. And I don't think we need to worry too much about it, because in a way I think it's great to speculate, but I think people will actually decide